Today we're taking a look at 5 of the biggest MIDI drum mistakes I see and how to avoid them so you can get your drums sounding sick. And be sure to stick around until the end, because the last one is a big one that I never see anyone talking about. A quick shout out to Fevgatos, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, for the idea of this video. If you've got anything you would like to see me cover in a future video, let me know in the comments. But anyway, getting back to the topic on hand, let's talk about MIDI drum mistake number 1. 127 velocity all the time. We've all heard an example of the dreaded machine gun snare roll, right? We don't want that. That's what happens when you just set the velocity of every single note as high as it goes and call it a day. That's not to say that you should avoid the highest velocities though. This is going to depend a bit on what drum program you're using. But with most of them, I'll stick with the highest velocity or close to it for my kinda normal kicks and snares, like the hits that are just part of the beat. But then you've got to go through and manually tweak any fills, ghost notes, or even just really fast sections of the song. Like for that machine gun snare fill from a minute ago. I would bring the velocity of the whole fill down a little bit, and then bring the second and fourth hit of each grouping down a little bit farther to create more variation from one hit to the next. Same thing with fast kick hits. If we take a look at this beat, it feels a little bit lifeless with the double kicks being the same velocity. If we just bring the second of the two hits down a little bit, it sounds a lot more interesting and has a lot more groove. Then when it comes to cymbals, you're going to want to go ahead and bring all of those down a good bit right from the start. Unlike with the shells of a kit, it's insanely rare that we would want the drummer to be smashing the cymbals as hard as they can. Again, I can't tell you an exact number to set it to, as it varies from one drum program to the next, but just experiment a bit and get those cymbals away from the highest velocity. A little bonus tip here. If you're in Pro Tools and you go to Event Operations, and click Change Velocity, there's a little randomized velocity feature. I think most other DAWs have this too. I know some call it humanize or something like that, but if you add just a little bit of that to your cymbals or drum fills after you have the general velocity set, it can add some nice subtle variation that can make it feel a little bit less static. This works especially well on closed hi-hat beats. So you're probably thinking, okay, cool, I've got the velocities dialed in and humanized a bit. Now I should probably randomize the timing as well, right? Wrong. Unless you have a really good feel for what makes drums sit in the pocket, you're better off leaving them fully quantized. Otherwise, it's more likely to start sounding sloppy, not like a great drummer with a great groove. If you absolutely insist on humanizing the timing a bit, I'd recommend only doing it to your cymbals, but leaving your kicks and snares right on the grid. But I'm gonna go ahead and guess that your song isn't just drums. There's probably going to be bass and guitar and vocals and whatever else recorded on top of the drums. And they're all probably going to be played by a human. So let those add the feel. Let those be the push and the pull against your rock solid drums. Your track will feel a lot better. Before I move on to mistake number 3, if you're digging these tips so far, my whole channel is dedicated to helping people make killer mixes. So be sure to subscribe so I can help you make your mixes killer too. But anyway, back to the list with mistake number 3, not treating your MIDI drums like real drums. Whatever drum program you're using probably has a mixer window in it, so it can be tempting to just set your levels in there and call it a day. Big mistake. Instead, most drum programs will allow you to send each element of the kit out to its own track in your DAW. Once you do that, you can process your drums just as you would with real drums. You can send them to a drum bus and add some bus compression, you can EQ and compress and saturate each element to your heart's content, and you can write automation come mix time. All of which will add so much life to your MIDI drums. Seriously, don't skip this step. And kind of going off the last one, mistake number 4 is just automatically using whatever drum sounds are built into your drum program. The sounds in a lot of drum programs are kind of trash, or even if they don't suck, they might just not have something that fits the vibe of your track. I typically use GetGood Drums Modern and Massive when I program drums, but the only thing I keep from there sound-wise is the cymbals. Once I send each drum to its own channel in Pro Tools, the first thing I do is slap an instance of trigger on each of the drums and put in my own samples. I'll play you 2 clips here. The first is the sound straight out of Modern and Massive. I have it set to the Pop Punker's Dream preset. Then I'll switch over to my samples. In this case, I'm using the East Kit, which is available in either the Essential Pack or the Complete Collection over at bettermixes.com/drum samples. That's a massive difference, and it took like a minute to do. And again, even if I liked the sounds in Modern and Massive, If I was working on an indie track or an Americana track or something, it'd take an insane amount of work to get them working in those contexts, when I can instead just drop new samples in that are already super close to what I'm looking for. And obviously, you don't have to use my sample packs, but you should, because they're the best. And there's a free one you can grab at bettermixes.com/drumsamples, or I'll link to it in the description down below. But anyway, moving on to mistake number 5, and this is a big one: trying to make your MIDI drums sound too realistic. Your goal, whether working with MIDI drums, real drums, or no drums, should be to make your song sound awesome, not to make it sound realistic. Now, obviously, like we discussed in mistake number 1, if your MIDI drums sound too unrealistic in the wrong ways, it's not going to sound good. But you can absolutely go too far in the other direction, making it sound much more realistic and much less good. This can be a lot of different things, like over-humanizing the timing of your drums, like we talked about in mistake number 2, or a lot of drum programs let you add cymbal bleed to your close mics. Like, are you kidding me? That's the last thing I want. When I'm recording real drums, I'm doing everything I can to minimize the amount of bleed. And now plugin companies want me to add it back in when working with fake drums? I've never heard an engineer say, "Man, these drums sound almost perfect, but I just wish we had captured more hi-hat bleed in the snare mic." Or another one I see a lot is people saying you shouldn't program anything that a person couldn't play, as in you shouldn't have your MIDI drums hitting the snare and the floor tom and the crash at the same time, because it's unrealistic. Nobody could play that. Who cares? If it sounds cool, do it. There have been plenty of times where I've been working with real drums and we would layer a second pass over a certain part so that we could have 3 or 4 things hitting at the same time. And no one ever complained that it wasn't possible to play with 2 arms, cause it sounded cool. And remember, when someone listens to your song, you want them to say, "Wow, that sounded sick," not, "Wow, that sounded very realistic." But anyway, let me know which of these tips helped you out most in the comment section. And if you want to learn some really cool drum mixing techniques, check out this playlist here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.